I remember the exact second everything tipped, not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing, of how fast your heart is moving, of how there's no one left to blame but yourself. I had crossed into a place where pretending was no longer possible. There was no rush of excitement like I'd imagined. No sudden clarity. What I felt instead was weight. Heavy and undeniable. The understanding that this wasn't happening to me, I was choosing it. That realization settled deep, cutting through every excuse I'd been holding onto that I told myself I could still stop. I told myself this was just a moment of weakness, that moments pass if you let them. But my body didn't listen to logic. My thoughts scattered, clashing with everything I believed about myself. Loyalty. Control. Integrity. All of it felt fragile, like it could crack under the pressure of a single decision that he was close enough that I could sense him without looking. Presence does that, it announces itself without sound. I became painfully aware of how little space existed between us, how that distance had already been shrinking long before this moment. Nothing about it felt sudden anymore. It felt inevitable, and that scared me more than desire ever could. My mind raced ahead, playing out consequences I wasn't ready to face. Faces. Questions. Silence that would follow me everywhere. I thought about the life I'd built, the promises I'd made without ever imagining they'd be tested like this. I thought about how easy it would be to turn away and how hard it would be to live with the memory if I didn't. There was a split second where time seemed suspended. Where everything I was and everything I was about to become balanced on the same fragile edge. I waited for guilt to stop me. I waited for fear to win. Instead, I felt a strange calm, like something inside me had finally given up the fight. That surrender wasn't loud. It didn't feel reckless or wild. It felt deliberate. Quiet. Almost gentle. And that's what haunts me the most. I wasn't swept away. I stepped forward with open eyes. In that moment, I understood that crossing the line doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Like acceptance. Like allowing something you've been denying to finally take shape. The realization hit hard. Wanting had already changed me. This was just the confirmation that I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel powerful. I felt exposed, stripped of every excuse I'd used to protect myself from the truth. This wasn't about loneliness anymore. Or feeling unseen. This was about choosing to betray something solid for something uncertain and intoxicating. When it was over, there was no relief. Just a hollow space where certainty used to be. The silence returned, heavier than before, filled with everything I hadn't said and couldn't take back. I avoided thinking too far ahead because the future suddenly felt unstable, like one wrong step could collapse it entirely. That I didn't regret it the way people expect you to regret things. Not immediately. What I felt was confusion. A tangled mix of guilt and longing, of shame and attachment. That combination scared me. Regret can be clean. This was messy. That I realized then that I had changed the shape of my life without knowing what would replace it. There was no undoing what had happened, no version of the past where I could pretend this choice didn't exist. I had crossed into something permanent, even if no one else knew yet. The hardest part wasn't what I'd done. It was knowing I'd felt alive while doing it. That truth sat heavy in my chest, impossible to ignore. It forced me to question everything, what I wanted, what I deserved, and whether comfort was the same thing as love. As I stood there, surrounded by the aftermath of a decision I could never unmake, one thought repeated itself over and over: this moment would follow me. Into my silence. into my relationship, into every version of myself that came after. And no matter how carefully I tried to move forward, would never be able to say I didn't know what I was doing when I let everything change. After that day, everything continued as if nothing had happened, and that was the most unbearable part. The house still woke up at the same time. Meals were still prepared. Conversations still took place. Laughter still appeared where it always had. But beneath it all, something rotten spread quietly, touching everything that my nephew never said a word that he didn't confront me. He didn't expose me. He didn't even avoid me completely. That silence became its own kind of punishment. When our eyes met, they didn't linger. When we were in the same room, the air felt heavier, charged with something unspoken. I could feel the distance even when he was only a few steps away. That I started noticing things I had never noticed before. The way he left rooms earlier than he used to. The way conversations ended abruptly when I walked in. The way his laughter sounded different, restrained, like something held back. Every small change felt intentional, even when it probably wasn't. Paranoia took root quickly. That I replayed the moment endlessly, analyzing every detail, every expression, every movement. I wondered what he thought of me now. Whether he felt disgust, anger, confusion, or all of it tangled together. I wondered if he hated me, or worse, if he had lost respect in a way that could never be repaired. That night, sleep became difficult. Silence amplified everything. My thoughts grew louder in the dark, cruel and relentless. I imagined conversations that never happened. Confessions that might come. Consequences that hovered just out of reach. I flinched at every unexpected sound, every raised voice, every shift in tone. Nothing came, and somehow, that made it worse. That I tried to convince myself that time would fix it. That memories fade. that people move on. But deep down, I knew better. Some things don't fade. They settle. They become part of how you see someone forever. The relationship I had risked everything for began to feel different too. The excitement dulled, replaced by anxiety. Moments that once felt intoxicating now felt tainted. I couldn't separate desire from fear anymore. Every interaction carried the weight of what had been witnessed, that I started withdrawing. Not just from that relationship, but from everything. Conversations felt forced. Smiles felt rehearsed. I felt like I was living inside a fragile structure that could collapse at any moment, held together only by silence and avoidance. At home, my spouse noticed something was off, even if they couldn't name it. I became distant, distracted, irritable. I answered questions vaguely. I avoided closeness, not out of lack of feeling, but because guilt had made intimacy unbearable. Every normal moment felt undeserved. I thought about confessing more than once. I imagined sitting down, speaking the truth, letting everything fall apart honestly instead of waiting for it to explode. But fear always won. Fear of destruction. Fear of judgment. Fear of being seen exactly as I was. So I stayed quiet. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The secret didn't disappear. It just became heavier. It followed me everywhere, coloring every interaction, every decision. I learned how exhausting it is to maintain a version of yourself that no longer feels real. My nephew's silence never broke. And I began to understand that it wasn't mercy. It was distance. A line drawn without words. He had seen something he couldn't unsee, and instead of reacting, he had chosen to step back, to protect himself from whatever version of me existed now. That realization hurt more than any confrontation could have. I lost something that day that I couldn't name properly. Trust, maybe. Or innocence. Or the comfort of believing that mistakes stay private. I learned how fragile relationships are when built on assumptions, how quickly they fracture when reality intrudes. I still don't know if he will ever speak about what he saw. I live with that uncertainty every day. It sits quietly in the background of my life, a constant reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. If there's one thing I understand now, it's this: betrayal doesn't always end with exposure. Sometimes it ends with silence, and that silence follows you far longer than any words ever could.
I wish I could say there was a clear moment where I made a decision, where I consciously chose to cross the line. But it didn't happen like that. It was slower, quieter, like something building underneath the surface until it finally broke through. That day didn't feel different at first. It started like any other, routine and predictable. My husband had already made it clear he would be home late, his voice distant even through the phone. My son had plans of his own, barely saying goodbye before walking out. I was left alone in that same silence I had grown used to, the kind that presses in on you the longer you sit with it. I should have kept myself busy, distracted my mind, avoided any situation that could lead to what I already knew was possible. But instead, I did nothing. I stayed there, aware of the emptiness, aware of my thoughts, and more importantly, aware of him. When the doorbell rang, I didn't feel surprised. That's what unsettled me the most. It was as if a part of me had been expecting it, waiting for it even. I took a breath before opening the door, already knowing who it would be. He stood there, calm, familiar, but there was something different in his expression. Less hesitation, more certainty. Like whatever existed between us was no longer something unspoken. I let him in without questioning it. The conversation started normally, or at least we both pretended it did. A few words exchanged, small talk that quickly faded because neither of us was really interested in it anymore. There was a tension in the air that made everything else feel unnecessary. It didn't take long before the silence returned, but this time it wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with everything we hadn't said yet. I tried to keep my composure, to act like I still had control over the situation, but my thoughts were already moving in a direction I couldn't stop. He was the one who broke the silence. He asked me if I was okay. Such a simple question, but the way he said it, it wasn't casual. It was direct, intentional, like he already knew the answer. I tried to respond the way I always did, with something dismissive, something safe. But the words didn't come out the way I planned. Instead, I told the truth, not all of it, but enough. Enough for him to understand that the quietness in my life wasn't peace, that the distance in my marriage wasn't something I had chosen. My voice felt heavier with every word, like I was finally admitting something I had been holding back for years. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix anything. He just stayed there, listening, closer than before. At some point, my composure slipped. The emotions I had been controlling for so long started to surface, and I hated how exposed I felt. I turned away slightly, trying to regain control, but that's when I felt it. His hand. It wasn't sudden or forceful. It was gentle, careful, like he was giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. And that was the moment that mattered most, because I didn't. I stayed still, fully aware of what that meant. My mind was screaming at me to step back, to end it before it went any further. Every reason, every consequence, every line that shouldn't be crossed flashed through my thoughts all at once, but none of it was strong enough to make me move. I turned back to face him, and for a second, everything else disappeared. There were no distractions, no excuses left to hide behind. Just that moment, and the choice I was about to make. He didn't rush it. He didn't push. He just looked at me in a way that made it impossible to pretend this was still something harmless. And then he said it. Not dramatically, not with rehearsed words, just simply and honestly. He told me he had been trying to ignore what he felt, that he knew it was wrong, that he knew he shouldn't even be standing there like this. But he couldn't pretend anymore. Hearing it out loud made it real in a way I couldn't deny. It removed every last layer of uncertainty, every excuse I had been holding on to. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't accidental. This was something we both understood. I should have ended it right there. I had the chance. One step back, one clear boundary, and everything could have stopped before it became irreversible. But I didn't take that step. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was. There was a pause, long enough for me to change my mind, long enough for me to walk away. But I didn't move. And he didn't either. The space between us disappeared slowly, almost cautiously, like neither of us fully believed we were actually doing this. My heart was racing, my thoughts were scattered, but at the same time, there was a strange clarity in it. I knew what this meant, I knew what it would lead to, and still I let it happen. What followed wasn't something I can describe in simple terms. It wasn't just a physical moment. It was everything that had been building up inside me for years, everything I had ignored, everything I had convinced myself didn't matter. It all came to the surface at once, but it didn't feel like relief the way I thought it might. It felt complicated, heavy, confusing in a way that made it hard to separate right from wrong in that moment. And when it was over, the silence returned again. Only this time, it was different. There was no tension left, no anticipation. Just reality settling in, piece by piece. I could feel it in the way I couldn't meet his eyes right away, in the way my thoughts started catching up to what had just happened. Nothing needed to be said, because everything had already changed. I felt it immediately. The weight of it. The understanding that this wasn't something I could undo, that no matter what happened next, this moment would stay with me. I had crossed a line I knew I shouldn't have, and there was no way to step back from it now. What I thought would be just a moment, something temporary, something contained, had already become something much bigger, and deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of it. It was only the beginning of something I wouldn't be able to control anymore. After that, nothing felt the same, no matter how hard I tried to convince myself otherwise. The house didn't change, the routines didn't change, the people around me didn't change, but I did. And that was enough to make everything feel unfamiliar. At first, I thought I could carry on like nothing had happened. I told myself it was just one mistake, something I could bury deep enough that it wouldn't affect the rest of my life. I avoided thinking about it directly, pushing it to the back of my mind whenever it tried to surface. But guilt doesn't work like that. It doesn't stay where you put it. It finds its way into everything. I started noticing it in the smallest moments. The way I couldn't hold eye contact with my son for too long without feeling something twist inside me. The way normal conversations felt heavier, like I was hiding something that didn't belong there. Even silence felt louder than before, like it was constantly reminding me of what I had done. He didn't disappear after that day. That would have made things easier. Instead, he stayed just as present as before, but the dynamic between us had completely changed. There was no pretending anymore, no uncertainty. What had been unspoken was now real, and that made every interaction more complicated. At first, he acted like nothing was wrong, but I could see it in the way he looked at me. There was an expectation there now, something deeper than before. He wasn't just someone passing through the house anymore. He was connected to me in a way that couldn't be undone, and he knew it. That's when the pressure started building. He began finding reasons to be around more often again, but this time it felt different. Before, I had welcomed those moments, even if I didn't admit it. Now, they made me uneasy. I started creating distance, avoiding being alone in the same space as him, keeping conversations short and controlled, but avoidance only made things worse, because every time I pulled back, he pushed a little closer. Not aggressively, not in a way that would draw attention, but enough to make it clear that he wasn't willing to let it go as easily as I wanted to. He reminded me, without saying it directly, that what happened between us wasn't something that could just be erased. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more present it became. The tension grew slowly, but steadily. I became more aware of everything around me. Every sound, every movement, every glance felt like it could expose the truth. It made me anxious in a way I hadn't felt before. I started second-guessing simple things, overthinking normal situations, constantly wondering if someone had noticed a change. My son didn't say anything at first, but I could tell something felt off to him. It was subtle, just small pauses in conversation, a slight shift in the way he looked at me sometimes. It wasn't suspicion yet, but it was enough to make me uneasy. And then there was the moment that nearly destroyed everything. It wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no immediate exposure. Just a situation that lasted a few seconds too long, where everything felt like it was about to come crashing down. A glance held at the wrong time, a silence that stretched just enough to feel unnatural. I saw it in my son's expression, confusion, not understanding, but questioning. And that was worse, because it meant he had noticed something, even if he didn't know what it was yet. That was the moment reality fully hit me. This wasn't contained. It wasn't controlled. It was already affecting things beyond just me. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I knew I had to end it. Not later, not gradually, but completely. There was no version of this that could continue without causing damage I wouldn't be able to fix. And for the first time since everything started, that truth felt stronger than anything else. When I finally created that distance, it wasn't easy. He didn't react the way I hoped he would. There was frustration in him, confusion, something close to hurt. He didn't understand how something that felt so real could suddenly be shut down like it meant nothing. But that was the problem. It didn't mean nothing. And that's exactly why it had to end. I made it clear without giving explanations that could make things worse. I pulled away completely, avoided being alone with him, reduced every interaction to the bare minimum. It was cold, distant, intentional, and slowly, he stopped trying. That should have been the end of it. But consequences don't disappear just because the situation does. Even after the distance, even after everything returned to what looked like normal from the outside, something inside me had already changed permanently. The guilt didn't fade. If anything, it became quieter, but heavier, settling into a place where it stayed with me all the time. My relationship with my son never felt as effortless as it used to. Even though he never confronted me, never asked questions, there was always a part of me that wondered if he sensed more than he let on. And my marriage, it continued, just like before. Same routines, same silence, same distance. But now I understood something I hadn't fully faced before. The emptiness I had tried to escape hadn't disappeared. I had just made it more complicated. I thought I was searching for something I had lost, but in the process, I lost something else instead. Something I couldn't get back: respect for myself, trust in my own decisions. The version of me that didn't have something to hide. Time moved forward, as it always does. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and eventually, the situation became a memory rather than a present reality. But it never truly left, because some mistakes don't end when the situation does. They stay with you, quietly, constantly, in the background of everything. And no matter how normal life looks again, you always know exactly where it changed.